Hi, everybody. I'm live right now. It's Heather. Wow. Happy New Year. Happy New Decade. For anybody who will be joining, right now I'm so excited because I have Robert Glazer on the LinkedIn Live today. And he is, I'm not sure most of you know this, but he's actually part of the Leadership with Heart community. He was episode number 42. So he's it's been some months back. And he came to me because we were both actually speaking at a conference, at a users conference. Gosh, was that 2 years ago? Oh,
yeah,
a year and a half ago or something.
TinyCon in October.
Yes.
Yeah, 2018.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's been a year and a half or something. And so, but what I loved during that time when I met you, you were talking about, it was kind of a unique blend or unique way of looking at this idea of 2 weeks notice, or just kind of what that experience looks like when employees are with you and maybe they're just not in the right place. Maybe you discover they're not in the right place. They discover they're not in the right place. You almost help them discover they're not in the right place, or they are, and kind of help what that process looks like to move them along. And one of the things that hit me about that was, well, number one, it was a different way of thinking about, how to get people to find what their purpose is and how to help people on their journey, whether their journey's with you inside the organization or not. And it was a different approach. It was more of a caring approach, which is why I wanted to have you on my show to begin with, because I'm talking to leaders who are more emotionally intelligent anyway on that show. And so it was something that just popped up to me. It was like, wow, that's kind of a different way of thinking about it. You think of most people saying, well, they're not in the right place, get them, they're out, and there's just not a conversation. And for you, it seemed almost like you're counseling them to a better place. And I love that. So again, I'm joined by Robert Glazer, and he is now the new author of Elevate. And it's Elevate, Push Beyond Your Limits and Unlock Success in Yourself and Others, which I absolutely love. And this is not your first book, though. You've done one other, right?
Second one. First one was a book about our industry. It was a marketing book. So this is my first sort of, I would say, mass market book.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I love that. And he's also the CEO of, is it Global Acceleration Partners?
Acceleration Partners. Yeah. Global. Probably a global firm, Acceleration Partners. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And then you have one other thing. I saw you're co-founder of something else. What was that brand?
Another business we spun off a few years ago called Brand Cycle. So I stay busy.
You stay really busy. So tell us why you decided to go from kind of like this, again, this talk on, and I think you even did a TEDx.
Yeah.
And was it around this topic? It was around this topic on the Elevate portion of things, or was it more around this 2 weeks notice idea?
Yeah, it was about the TEDx talk was about the 2 weeks notice idea. I think Elevate kind of is different, but wraps around on that about capacity building. But just Elevate came out of the story of Friday Forward, which was a newsletter that I had started to our team of 30 or 40 people and started getting shared outside of our company and reached about 100,000 people around the world today. I went to write a book sort of about that, and then ended up writing a book about this notion of capacity building, which was what I realized was why Friday Forward had resonated, what I had used to sort of improve my own life, and essentially what our company's leadership strategy was, which was to focus on building people holistically as a high growth business. We were growing 20 or 30% a year. I know a lot of business leaders have heard this stat that every time you double your business, you break half your people and half your processes. And I really didn't want to break half my people every 18 to 24 months, which when you're growing 30, 40% a year is sort of the compounding effect. So we had begun this thing of investing in people holistically, helping them build their capacity. And I think the mindful transition program was really just an extension of that, and our belief that you should care about people, but you should be honest with them too. So I think one of the misnomers that's funny of our company, and we had a lot of people, we've won a lot of awards and people applying here, is that we are a great place to work. We've won all these great place to work awards, but we're also want to be first in our industry, have very high performance standards, and it's not for everyone. It's intense. So I think our philosophy is let us help, invest in you and build our people the best we can. But as another author, Bobby Herrera, wrote this great book. He used a mountain analogy. I think, and as a company grows, right, you get to a summit, and then you get ready to the next summit. As you get ready for the next summit, some of the people aren't right for that next summit, and some of you decide, and some of the people decide they don't want to climb that summit. They want to climb a different summit. And I think there's just better ways to have both respectful but direct conversations about what that means.
And it's interesting because I remember listening to you at that conference, it did remind me of Reid Hoffman's book, The Alliance.
Yeah.
That idea of kind of checking in, even just from the beginning, kind of, okay, I'm going to have in that book, the precept is that you're going to establish almost an understanding of how long this tour of duty is going to be. And they look at it like, okay, in chunks. So someone says, I really
like
plan
a sports
to stay there
contract,
for 1 year.
Right? Yeah. You revisit it and you say, hey, are you overpaid? Are you underpaid? You still want to be here? We just assume that employment is forever. And I think, and that compensation always goes up. And I think those things are both maybe not true. In fact, I had someone on my podcast recently, Tom, the founder of the Motley Fool, and he was talking about at a cultural event, how they had what would you do for a pay cut day? And it was like, what kind of work would you want to be doing, for a pay cut, to try to get at were people doing things for money that weren't making them happy? And I think that is, some people don't step back and say, you know what, I'd rather be doing half of this for half the amount of money or something like that. So, what we've tried to do is just have a foundation of psychological safety. We're actually rolling out sort of it's been a difficult thing. It is a real change, but we've had the program. We're even rolling out a public process of what does underperformance look like and what are the steps and what can both parties expect when there is a performance issue. And usually it's one of two tracks, right? We make it really open for the person or Heather to say, you know what, I'm not sure this is the right job for me, or I want to do something different. I want to climb a different mountain. We say, okay, great. Well, let's talk about what that means and let's help support you in that and maybe work on a couple-month transition plan. Alternatively, that's where you raise your hand. I mean, on the flip side, we might say, look, Heather, we've seen a bunch of issues in this area. We can go down the sort of performance route, but let's have a conversation. Do you like it here? Is this the right work environment? Is it are there things that are just not going to change that are problematic, and also sort of push the transition discussion from the other way? And we have people continuing to work here now at all times who are on transition programs out of our organization, and we treat them like we would every other employee. Or think about that person, that free agent, last year, Kyrie Irving, Boston Celtics. Well, maybe not a great example but everyone knew he was leaving. They knew he wasn't coming back, but he plays on the team and they go for a championship. I mean, I think that sort of expiring contract free agent is the same equivalent when people say, how could you have someone at your company that is going to leave? People do it in sports all the time. I think it's just, you need a different dialogue.
And I think, again, I think of this in the context of some of the stuff I just talk about around caring leadership. I think there's no better way that you can care for a person than to, again, help them to determine what it is that fills them up.
Yeah.
And if you're able to do that, like, again, with a level of honesty and transparency, and when they know that you see them, you truly see them for what they are, and what they bring to the table. And maybe your table is full with the people that, based upon what they bring to the table, but some other table needs them to be around it, and you help them go that journey. That is, to me, like epitome of the leader who really cares for their people.
Yeah,
so I think it's critical.
There's a really weird thing, and I'm trying to engage some psychologists to help me put like a name around this, but I think that we actually form some dissonance around a person. So let's say, you're Heather, you're on my team and I really like you, but you're messing up, right? And you're just not doing well. Well, instead of leaning into that great relationship and having an honest conversation and talking about what that means, I start like making you out to be a bad person. Like, oh, Heather was late for the meeting. See, Heather messed it, because I know I have to do something bad and that's uncomfortable for me. And I'll make it, now I need to distance the relationship rather than leaning into the relationship. And I'll give you a really interesting example. So we did a pretty intensive 2-day leadership training for a lot of our upcoming leaders a few weeks ago that I led off site. And one of the things that we added this time was a 2 to 3 hour difficult conversation practice. And we get people coming in and they were given one side of a conversation that they had to come into, from their performances. They think the manager thinks the performance is bad. They think it's good. The person thinks they're making small mistakes, and you need to tell them that their job's, over. And they only had one side of the story, and they would have the conversation. The room would sort of weigh in on, hey, did they make the points or whatever? And then they'd kind of go back to the conversation. And it was really interesting because they didn't know the thing. And I can tell you that every time the person beat around the bush with what they had to say, they actually sounded more inauthentic. And even though they struggled to do this in pretend, in a role play environment, and then we'd say freeze, and we said to one person, hey, look, you're beating around the issue. Tell her that like this is a job threatening issue that is going on. And this person said it, and it just sounded so much more authentic. And the room could hear it, that every time the person was direct and caring, no matter how difficult what they were saying was, but they just sounded better and more authentically. Otherwise, they were like, oh, well, and there's an example, and they were just beating around, the bush, which actually just, you could hear it sounded more disingenuous.
Huh. That is so crazy. I would love to hear what a psychologist how they might frame some of those, what they would call that, right? Just that whole process.
I think it's some kind of distance, right? I
think so too. Yeah, I know. I was like, we're going back to get our degrees. I don't know. I think we'll stay where we're at and just kind of continue the work we're in. But I think it's all very interesting, this human work we're doing, because it's really about human behavior in the end. And we are choosing to kind of, right? We're choosing to frame out and create an environment that produces more positive emotions and maybe even more positive outcomes in people, in ourselves, and in people that we lead. So I want to just dive a little bit into your book. You kind of break it down into, is it 5 or 6 different kind of like core principles?
Four elements. So spiritual, intellectual, physical, and emotional. Okay.
So I'd love to just look at, I don't want to go necessarily into the why part, although I think the why is super important, but I love this idea of overcoming kind of self-limiting beliefs, and how that has revealed itself to you, either personally or in the workplace, since obviously you oversee such a big organization for the type of industry that you're in.
Yeah, let me just, I think, take 2 seconds to just kind of go at a high level, because I think they go in order. So spiritual capacity is sort of your core values, who you are, what you want most. Like that's sort of the orienting North Star. And I think if you're not clear on that, you might be running really hard or doing really well in something that doesn't matter to you. And that's why that's important. Intellectual then is sort of, how you learn, plan, focus, get better in service of what it is that you're trying to get to in your spiritual capacity. So this is routine, discipline, goal setting, kind of your operating system, how you learn to get better. And then physical is your health and well-being. And then emotional is your sort of self-limiting beliefs and how you react to the external world. So it's relationships, external events, like how you show up. Well, the other things are sort of internal. It's how you show up in the outside world. And yeah, a lot of the times our self-limiting beliefs, I think, really hold us back. And they often came from someone either inadvertently or advertently, whether it was a teacher or a parent or something. I mean, people have to be really careful what they say in front of their kids. It's amazing how people remember. When I was 13 years old, I remember my mom or dad said X, Y, and Z. And a lot of times it is, I think, also hard these days in the social media world where everyone just shows their top 5% online, to admit that something didn't work or that you failed or work through it, which is actually critical to developing resilience, is just getting back up and going forward. But a lot of what you're seeing is just this illusion of perfection in other people's lives, which is actually nothing more than an illusion.
Oh, isn't that so true? Well, I did that TEDx talk on transforming adversity into opportunity. And I'm one of those people that I know what I don't know. I know nothing. I learned that way early on, right? I just continue to grow. I'm a constant learner. This idea of overcoming obstacles. But you know what? One area I'm not perfect in, it really is. It continues to be the thing that just makes me the imperfect leader that I am. And it is that I probably share too much, or like these ideas. I'm saying leader in the workplace, leader at home. Yeah. I share too much. I talk about things I probably shouldn't be talking about. That thing. And I'll feel myself going, this is that emotional self-management thing. I will feel myself going down the road. And sometimes I will stop myself and sometimes I will not. Yeah. And that is like when we all have this leadership thing, this thing that stops us from being our best. And that is the thing that stops for me from being my best. So then in the end, I told my husband way in the beginning, we have 4 kids. I told him way in the beginning that, we get to choose which emotional baggage we give our kids. We all give our kids emotional baggage. There's just no way around it. We're all going to.
Whatever you're overcompensating for is what they'll be in therapy for in 20 years.
Exactly. So, I had that. I experienced that. Hence, some of my story is there. And every day I'm trying to compensate. This idea that I talked about in my TEDx about not feeling good enough, not ever feeling good enough. And no matter how much I try to fight, I may not feel that way. And so then what happens is, what do we do? What do I do in my own little undercurrent way, not really realize I'm doing it? I produce some of those things inside my own kids. It's just, again, you try not to, but it's a part of your baggage. And so I guess we all in 2020 trying to evaluate what kind of baggage we have our own on our own shoulders, and what it is we're passing on to those that we lead or those that are around us. It's something to really be considering, right? And how can we help ourselves, like you said, overcome those limiting beliefs, those things that really stop us, and also realize how much it connects to the people in our lives and how we're stopping them from being their best too, right?
Yeah, and there's a couple things there if we're just diving in on emotional capacity. I think one, being really intentional with who you surround yourself with and whether they're pulling you down or bringing you up. If you're the smartest person in the room, you might be time to switch rooms. It sounds terrible, but it's true, right? You want people who are pulling you up. I think the other thing, we go through this cycle. I think being really clear about what we control and we don't control. I've written about this a lot, but like the weather, it's a good barometer for me. Like, do you look at the weather and you're like, oh, it's raining tomorrow? Or are you someone who gets stressed at the weather, which is at the app, and then it's like, oh, it's raining, I'm going to the movie, or I'm on vacation, we don't often control what happens. Like, someone hits my car, today, like, I don't control that, but I control exactly what happens next. I control whether and we shouldn't we shouldn't mistake the two things, that I got in an accident, but did I mope around and scream and swear and drag myself around for 2 days in anger? Or did I be like, you know what, I have insurance and I move on? And I think the first type of person is the victim mentality of all these things happening to them. The second person has the same amount of things happen to them. They just approach it in a different way. And they say, I control my reaction to the situation. You and I get into a difficult conversation at 9 a.m. in the morning, and maybe you know how to handle these conversations better than I do at work because you've learned on getting better and you've listened to podcasts and you work on your intellectual capacity. At 9:05, you're back to work, haven't thought of me, for the rest of the day. I am stewing. I'm like, oh, Heather, I'm pissed. I waste my whole day being angry about this conversation, right? We both experienced the same 5 minutes, but what came next was a real difference in emotional capacity. And this is again, we all get the same amount of hours in a day. You went about and, lived your day, and I went about and wasted my whole day stewing about a 5-minute conversation.
Yeah. That is interesting and when we just think about those who are more resilient or, and try to even build resilience in ourselves and those who lead. It is interesting how some of us just more naturally have the ability to kind of just get over stuff much more quickly. And
physical builds emotional, right? I think this talks about like doing things you didn't think you could do physically. Like, I always pick a new challenge to do every year, like, because then it gets you saying, oh, I could do that. And it gets in a positive cycle. The people who always thought the worst of everything or can't do anything, they get themselves in a very, very vicious cycle.
Yeah, it's so true. So when we talk about a spiritual, I'd like to talk a little bit more about that. So, what's your main focus in the spiritual front for elevation?
Yeah, so spiritual capacity is not religion, but it is, to me, it is your core values, your core purpose, or what you want most. I think if you're going through life and you can't articulate your core values, you're not making as good of decisions as you can make. Most of us know our core values. We feel them. We feel when they're crossed, but we don't know why, and so it's a process of self-actualization. It's kind of like driving a car through a dark tunnel and you hit a wall and you bounce off, and you hit a wall and you bounce off. And if I turned on the lights and I painted the lines for you, you would get through the tunnel faster and without banging the car on both sides. To me, that is the difference between like having your core values on your desk and saying, oh, this situation doesn't feel right to me, or looking at this decision and making the right decisions. Because I see a lot of people out there, maybe because of, again, an overcompensation or childhood or upbringing put pressure on them. They're really good at intellectual, physical, and emotional. They're very high achievers in something that provides them no satisfaction or doesn't make them happy, right? They haven't aligned it to who they are and what they want most. And I think that's where you get that feeling of inauthenticity. So I think that spiritual capacity comes first, because you figure out who you are and what you want. You then work on developing your skills in service of those things to get better. You take care of yourself and healthy, but you have a clear mission and purpose of why that's important to you. And then you develop better relationships and the right relationships in support of that journey and emotionally kind of resilience. And that's where all four areas of capacity building just equal someone who is achieving at a high level. And I like the word achievement better than success, because I think achievement is fulfillment of what it is that you want most. Success is often an external definition that someone else projects on us, right? You might say, oh, look at him. He's so successful. He runs this company, just published a book. Like, you might not know that my wife's not speaking to me, my kids aren't speaking to me, and I'm near bankruptcy. I think a lot of times that is a little bit of a mirage when we talk about someone else's success. We're projecting our definition of success on them. There are a lot of people I know who are achieving at a high level and doing stuff who their true success is probably writing in a cabin in Idaho somewhere, right? They just have not given what would actually make them happy is not what it is that they're doing a really good job at. They desperately would love to pull out of all that stuff, but they're kind of in pretty deep on it.
Well, so I want to say hi to Tyler, if you're still there. Tyler Adams was there, of course. He's our fave. Lori, I'm seeing your comments here. So one of them is, I don't think we realize how our emotions tend to affect people around us, but the questions, are we willing to break the triangle and take charge? How do you take charge when you do not have a clue to the strings? That's one of them. And then she said, let's see, self-suit is the beginning. Self-suit is the beginning of the journey. I'm not sure if that's what you meant, self-suit. She probably meant another word.
Well, I think the strings are probably the spiritual capacity. And again, I think this process of figuring out your values, what you want most, your purpose, then the strings are kind of the intellectual capacity. Like, okay, so what do I want? And then how do I get it? How do I get better? Because what I want to acquire with intellectual capacity is different. Like, I want to have discipline around what? I mean, well, I want to have goals around what? I want to have good plan. Oh, that what is really personal to what it is that I want. And so I think that's why they go in order. And that's why I think too, even physical, like when I know what I want, I know how to get it. It becomes really important for me to keep and to pay attention to my physical health, because I can feel that work as an accelerant or a drag.
That is so true. I kind of struggle in and out with the physical, and that's probably another area that's a little bit of a weakness. But I've been much better, I'd say, over the last year and a half of trying to focus on it. I would say over the holidays, it's the eating stuff that's the hardest for me, not necessarily the working out or kind of staying physically fit. But it is interesting because of all of it, even while I'm in the midst of it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this hurts so bad. The mental portion of this is what I want to achieve this year. Yeah. And I'm like you, if I can just hold on to or grab onto maybe one or two things that I'm trying to get to by the end of the year, I can really kind of that gives me the positive momentum, particularly if they're bigger things. It depends on what it is for me, right? But if that one or two bigger things, then it kind of helps me stay focused for the whole year on achieving that thing.
Right. If you were 3 weeks away from competing your first triathlon in January and, you were really close and you were there, you might be like, I don't want that cake. Like, I mean, it's going to mess up my goal. And that goal only works if that goal is tied to something that's important to you. Like if being healthy, or it makes you more present for your family, or like it's all got to be important to you. If it's just for a goal's sake, blow through it and then go back to whatever you were doing before.
Yes, that is so true. I think about like the programs that say, oh, it's a 20-day this or a 10-day detox or whatever the heck, right? You have those things where they have a deadline and then you go back to your normal way. And
everyone's on dry January now. Like,
I'm sorry, I'm not giving up wine, but it's just one of it's like, you know what you want to give up, and certain things I'm not going to give up. But actually, speaking of, this is the funniest thing. I did a live before where I have all these empty wine bottles, and it makes me look like I'm some kind of lush or something. But I'm doing this. I'm doing this thing called Mom Prom in my kids' school, and they needed us to all collect like empty wine bottles. I'm like, well, that's going to be super easy. for us to do all of this, to do that over the holidays, because that's like the biggest time, right? Or we're drinking more wine or whatever. So I think that's hilarious because I literally have wine bottles right next to me. But the goal will be for me, I'm not giving a point. I'll reduce it, but try that physical idea of just, again, what is the goal? And I love, so I think with any of them, like, the finding your why or your purpose, like understanding what that is, the emotional side of things, understanding where you want to be, and then, okay, now how? So this whole intellectual thing. And so talk a little bit more about that. Like, how do we plan once we know, like, this is what fills me up. These are my values. This is where I'm going. And then, okay, how do I actually kind of continue to do that? What are just a couple tactical things that we can focus on?
So this is where I actually borrow from like organizational best practices. So if you have sort of your vision and your values, then that really translates into long-term goals, and the long-term goals should fulfill that. So years ago, I thought I was good at goal setting. I would set a lot of one-year goals. I would hit them. They were totally disconnected. What I came to realize is, like, your 5 or 10-year goals should serve your core purpose and values. Like in doing them, you should be like serving a value. Like, let's say gratitude, is a core value of yours. And then a 10-year goal is to write a book that helps 1 million people, right? That way you're making sure that, like, writing the book that helps 1 million people actually serves your value and your purpose. And then you break the 5 and 10-year goals down into 1-year goals, into quarterly goals, which are down payments on that. And then you start applying that sort of routine and discipline and the accountability so that it's all aligned, so that the things that you are working on or towards are the things that mean the most to you. And then in those things, you got to figure out, okay, how do I have the discipline? How do I do it better, faster, smarter, right? I think we tend to acquire knowledge around things that are important to us or interesting to us. So if I want to write a book, well, I got to get smarter on writing a book. So I'm going to go speak to 100 authors, and I'm going to talk to agents, and I'm going to take a writing course, right? So that now becomes the thing that I want to improve in, because I can see forward into how this all plays out. You got to be really connected. As I would say, like, if you say, oh, my goal is to own a lake house in 10 years. Well, why? I mean, is it because you want a place to spend with your family? Like, you may be telling yourself that, but your family may not like the lake. You might be divorced by then, and really the lake house was just about showing that you made it. So you got to make sure that you're picking these things for the right reasons. And if owning a lake house for your family is the ultimate goal, then you should not be sacrificing your family, in the process of getting there. That makes not a lot of sense. That should just be the ultimate manifestation of this great getaway that you wanted to have for a family, not to be divorced and have all your kids not speaking to you by the time that you could afford the lake house.
So do you have, like, let's say for 2020, do you have some kind of sheet, some form, some poster, something that shows, all of these things that, like, you want to get to, but then, like, at the very top has your, like, the why, the purpose statement, or whatever? Do you have something?
I actually created something called the Whole Life Dashboard, which is based in Excel, because that's how business people code. So you can, it's in the book, or you can Google it and you can find it and you can download it, but it lets you set up all these things, the long-term, the short-term, your values, to spend 5 or 10 minutes every morning recalibrating. Because my belief is, every day when you move a little bit in that right direction, we tend to jump to the things that are easiest, the laundry list, check off things, and not like, I had this morning, this thing has been sitting on my list for like a hard thing for 2 weeks. I just not been started. And what I needed to do is, I just needed to do steps A and B today. And tomorrow I'll do C and D, and I'll sort of, this lets you recalibrate and realign once a quarter and look at the goals. So, like, when I sit down at the beginning of every year, I don't do resolutions, but I look at the 5-year goals again. I sort of pick the 1-year goals, and looking at that, I kind of recalibrate. And then I line it up for Q1. I'm like, all right, what dominoes do I need to start knocking down for Q1 to get to where I want to be by the end of Q4?
Love that. I think the message I'm hearing is, the bite-size idea, the bite-size pieces, because I think if we just go by the end of the year, then it's like, number one, we don't even know how to get there. Like, taking those little steps.
Make down, like, book, unless you're Malcolm Gladwell, like, or Adam Grant, like, a book does not get written in a cabin, for a week. It gets written like a page a day. Yeah. And so what a lot of people do is they look at big monolithic goal over here, small to-do list here, and they just keep doing small to-do. Well, the small to-do list should all be things that are kind of like biting away at the big monolithic goal. Like, if you're never going to climb the mountain if you don't walk towards it. And I think this is our issue fundamentally with urgent and important, is that, we only deal with the important stuff once it's urgent. We have a hard time dealing with the important stuff before it's urgent. So we deal with the urgent but not important stuff first, because it just helps us feel like we check it off. Like, perfect example, like today I spent 2 to 3 hours on something that is like, will have no outcome right now, but it is an key important step on something that's really important to me in the long run. I was having a hard time doing an unrewarding like down payment on it, but I just had to do it.
I love the idea of the down payment.
Yeah.
Because that makes me think of house. So when I think of down payment, I think of house. I think there's some, and so then once you make the down payment, you obviously at the end you make other payments or whatever, but in the end you make that final payment and now it's yours. And so you can kind of hold this thing. And I like that philosophy, because if
you make down payments, you have less of a mortgage, right? So
there's less of a liability. Yeah,
right.
You're right. Yeah. So you might be a little freer. So I don't know. I like that concept of down payment. That's again, that was that you spoke to me even when I first met you at TinyCon with some of that different language. And I have one other friend who does that, who has this kind of a similar language. I don't know if you know Mike Vacanti. He's the founder of Humans First Club.
No.
And he's a very good friend of mine. Love him. And he's someone who he just uses really different vernacular than most people are ever used to hearing. And so he turns things on its head and you're like, oh, what? I really didn't think that. So he just came out with a book just recently called Believership. And it's a new model for leadership.
Yeah.
And the words he used in there, you should look at it. You should maybe just reach out to him and connect. I think, again, I know the way you are, how you talk and how you think, and he is very similar, very, very similar. I love having people like you guys around, and I'm glad to have you in the community. He is, just so you know, for those who are joining, this is Robert Glazer, and he's episode 42 of the Leadership at Heart podcast. So we didn't talk about any of this stuff because he didn't have the book in the pipeline then, or he did, but he didn't have it right then. And so go back and listen to that episode, because there's just a lot of richness there and tons to learn. In fact, when I met him, he was talking about this new idea, this new concept of 2 weeks notice, and how to be relating with team members who maybe don't belong where they're at inside the organization, either in the position or in the organization as a whole, but how you help them to find a new path for themselves in a much more deliberate, transparent, open way. So definitely check out that episode. And I know you have to be hopping off here soon because you've got a hard stop, but I am very thankful that you shared some of this time. So don't forget, everybody who's on here, his new book is Elevate, and it's Push Beyond Your Limits and Unlock Success in Yourself and Others. Definitely check that out. And I know he's got lots of other resources. So when you go check that out and you go Google it, I'm sure on his website, you can find the whole life dashboard and anything else about it. He's got a newsletter called Friday Forward that a lot of people subscribe to. So you can access in many different ways. So thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Heather. I appreciate it.
Happy New Year to you and everybody else
too. All right.
Bye,
no resolutions, but we'll all get back to work on our long-term plans. All right. Thank you.
Yes, and we'll be down limits.
All right.
Bye, everybody.